when I was teaching or guest lecturing, I try to structure what I do with a lot of spaces or opportunities for discussion. Sometimes it's hard because the students are not always ready or interested or want to talk and engage. If the majority of their experiences in classrooms is someone talking to them or at them, when you come and start asking them for their views and opinions, it's difficult sometimes in the beginning to get the conversation going back and forth. But slowly, if you show how you would like the classroom experience to be like, you can get the students to be willing and interested to engage. Asking questions, asking students to give their views, opinions, comments, making sure that students fully understand that you are very honest when you say that, all views are welcome, that, if it's completely contrary to what I think or say, that's also welcome. Making sure that the students also see that I'm honest if I don't know the answer, that I will say that, these days it's not difficult because we can ask the students, I can say that, and I've done that before. I would say to the students, I really don't know, but can somebody Google it, on a laptop or on phone or whatever it is. And the students then quickly go and start looking for information.
Student contributions are extremely important. I'm tempted to say they're at the center of what we do when one looks at it from a student-centered approach to learning and teaching, where the student is at the center of what we do, and the student being one of the most important role player, if not the most important role player in this learning and teaching system, if I were to call it that. I think this ties in well with what we as a university are trying to do amongst the key themes, which is humanizing pedagogy, where we say the human in what we do and how we do it is important. And the human or the humanity of the student is important in the classroom, especially for one who comes from the Faculty of Humanities. It is very important for us to value humanity and value a human for who she or he is and what they bring. I think what I've, over the few years that I've been teaching, wanted to do the most is to move away from a situation where a student is merely identified by their student number, where a student is just equal to their student number, and go deeper to say, let's know the student by name. Let's know the student's surname. Let's know the student's background. Who are you? Where do you come from? What informs who you are? And to answer the question of how we further encourage welcoming and valuing students in learning and teaching, for me, it is by encouraging engagement and conversations in the classroom, by facilitating an environment that enables students to share their views and enables students to have conversations with the lecturer, one, but also to have conversations, student-to-student conversations too, which are very important in us getting views from students in the classroom.
If we are to challenge each other, if students are to challenge me, if I'm to challenge them, if students are going to challenge each other's viewpoints, we just have to remember that we are in an educational institution, that, if we are challenging each other, we have to do that with evidence. With, I cannot just say that I don't like something, why, if I say that I disagree with somebody, I need to explain why, and I then need to substantiate my viewpoints with evidence. And I think that's what we have to do at university for anything, for in papers that we write, we have to substantiate our viewpoints or our disagreements with evidence, with sources, with literature that is out there that then shows that, what we bringing to the table is backed up by the knowledge that exists out there.
I think for me, that's the most exciting thing about being in a classroom and teaching. When a student challenges perspectives or content, because perspectives and content are meant to be challenged. There is no one universal perspective or one universal content that should be accepted as, dare I say, the Bible truth without being challenged, without being questioned, without being interrogated. And this is exactly what a 21st century university is supposed to be doing, encouraging students to challenge perspectives, to challenge content, to challenge what is given to them, right? To challenge everything that is around them. And this is what we seek to do on a daily basis. I think students come into a university because they want to challenge the status quo, and they want to know more, they want to question things, they want to develop perhaps new perspectives and new contents. So the classroom is a space for challenging perspectives, for challenging content, for challenging knowledge and knowledges. The classroom is a space for diverse views, and students should be given the platform to challenge, critique, interrogate. We should not be taking offense to students challenging our views as lecturers or textbooks given to, views given in textbooks. That's what exactly should be done, challenged.
One way of dealing with sensitive topics is not talking about them. Another way is to try and unpack the sensitive topics. And over the years, I've come across people and academics who basically, I remember 2016, 2017, when young Black South Africans in the classrooms or at universities wanted to talk about the issues of racism, decolonization, white privilege, and how those then, influence the university spaces. And, I've been in spaces with white academics who would just basically say that, that's not something they're comfortable with, and they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about it between each other. They don't want to talk about it in the classrooms. But that's not the solution. So we're going to just shove the problems under the carpet. We have to talk about these things. How do I prepare myself for, let's say, talking about racism, talking about white privilege? I try to read as much as possible. I since 2015, I went through a whole, I would call it call it re-education of myself. When the whole Fees Must Fall movement started, there were a lot of discussions and debates organized by the students, all progressive academics. I would go to spaces very often at Nelson Mandela University. That used to be kind of a joke. I used to be one of the few, if not the only, white person at many of these events, and I would just go to the events and listen. I needed to learn. These were serious, important issues that were discussed, and young people, especially students, started talking about people like Fanon and many other progressive radical scholars, around the world, and many of them I didn't know about. I did my PhD in development studies, and I was never exposed to Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. It's crazy that is possible at any day and age in a field that's literally is a textbook for your field. but my education, my studies here did not expose me to that writing at all. So I ended up just writing notes and then getting books and reading as much as possible to be ready to make an opinion for myself, and then also to be able to discuss and debate and talk about different things. And it took me years to do that, and I am comfortable to critically discuss these issues in a classroom, in an open discussion, whatever it is. It took me years to be ready for that. So what I'm kind of trying to say is that there is so much that we have to do to be knowledgeable for meaningful critical discussion. I mean, we can go in without any knowledge and just be ignorant, and that's ridiculous. I mean, that's not something that can be expected of anybody who is in higher education. We have to talk, discuss, and debate all these issues. But we also have to prepare ourselves. And for myself, for a white person who is not South African, but is a white person, I have to fully understand where all these, I mean, if you talk about race and racism, if you talk about white privilege, I have to try as much as I can to understand where all these things and issues and discussions and debates are coming from. What is the baggage out there? What are the discussions, debates? What are the issues? In order to participate. I mean, I cannot just go in and say that something is not comfortable because, I'm white and I cannot talk about white privilege. There are libraries full of literature on these topics that clearly give us an idea of how racism, white supremacy, and white privilege have shaped and continue to shape the world. And for us to just dismiss all that and to say that we are not comfortable talking about it, therefore that's not going to be a discussion in our classroom or in our spaces where we work, it's just ridiculous. So so this is a very difficult question that in itself could be a paper or a book, but I don't know if I'm making sense, but it's for me to be part of these discussions, I have to do so much work to be able to be part of the discussion, to be able to be a contributing part of the discussion, and not just somebody who sits there and doesn't contribute, doesn't understand, is just kind of continuing with the whole same old kind of status quo thinking. So it's a tough question, but I think we have to be willing to be challenged. We have to be willing to be told that we don't know enough about an issue or topic, and we have to be willing to go and learn. As I said, I went on for months, I mean, actually years, reading tons of stuff in order to be able to not just go to events and listen to people talk about these issues, but also be able to then contribute and ask questions. It took me years, and I think that is what is required, especially from white academics and researchers such as myself, whether they are from South Africa or they come from somewhere else, especially when we talk about topics that have to do with race in South Africa and the world.
When we engage on topics that are sensitive in nature, I move away from the role that I ordinarily assume when we have ordinary conversations, because on a daily basis, I am also a participant in these conversations. But when one picks up that this is a contentious issue, it perhaps becomes more important for me as a lecturer to facilitate a conversation of mutual respect for each other across the board in that classroom. And even for those who are not represented in the classroom, that their views are also respected, or their perspective or backgrounds are also respected. So it's important to ensure that respect, or mutual respect, continues to prevail, even though a topic might be sensitive or emotive, and a mutual respect for views also prevails. It boils down to accepting that our realities will not be the same across the board. Our backgrounds differ, and these backgrounds determine or influence our views. And what is important is that we create a common ground as lecturers, creating a ground that says, let's have these conversations, as sensitive as they are, but let's have them with mutual respect. When one asks whether the current curriculum allows for criticism or transformation, and my knee-jerk response is one that says criticism and transformation do not come without a pushback. When knowledge is being criticized, or a curriculum is being criticized, the right or the authority holder will most probably push back and defend it. Transformation is the same. When one attempts to push for transformation, he or she who does not want to transform, or does not want transformation to take place, will push back. So I think for us to expect the current curriculum to allow, or easily allow for that matter, criticism and transformation would be very wishful of us, because the barriers of current knowledge system, current content, current curriculum are still here, and they're defending these knowledges, and they're defending these curriculums, they're defending this content. So we should therefore expect this resistance to criticism. We should expect resistance to transformation. It is there. I wouldn't say the current curriculum allows for it. It doesn't. It's constantly pushing back. But ours should be a tactful, skillful, and somewhat thrusting or driven quest to criticize and to question towards transformation. Because our approach should not be one that says the curriculum should allow us to criticize or transform it, because it might not. So we should be there, constantly driving and thrusting at the quest for transformation. And I guess to conclude, I would say transformation comes as a result of criticism. We have to criticize in order for us to transform, because through critiquing, we realize that this is not transformed. It requires transformation. And that is when we then push towards transformation.
We have to be willing to admit that we not maybe the people whose voice should be the only voice, and that we need to bring other voices who are sometimes even more appropriate, and allow those voices to lead the way, so that in the process, we can together shape whatever the outcome is, whether there is a paper or it is the curriculum, so that we are not the sole sources of what comes out, because there could be shortcomings. We're not the lead protagonists of, and we're not the only protagonists in this whatever we are doing. That there are other people. I think it's the way that we are willing to. I mean, how do we deal with prejudices? We have to acknowledge that we might not know everything, and we then have to come up with a solution that will include other viewpoints in what we are doing.
This ties in well with the name change. I think we moved from teaching and learning to learning and teaching. Was it last year? You'll correct me if I'm wrong here. And I think this name change was very well placed to answer this question, because we are constantly learning. We are constantly learning, and learning comes before teaching. So because we all come from different backgrounds, we're influenced by different factors. We come with our own biases. We come with our own prejudices. And what is important is that we are open to learning, and we're open to constantly learning, to learning as a perpetual thing, and that happens each and every day. So for me, it is important to always be open to learning. And in learning, we acknowledge that, okay, this bias or this prejudice might be influenced by my background, especially as a male in South Africa, considering how patriarchal our society is. I already come with that as, a bias that is not recognized, or I don't recognize that it as a bias, but it is there and it is at play. So I believe that we acknowledge them by knowing that we come from different backgrounds, and we are then open to learning, and I guess they say relearning and unlearning constantly. And my thinking is that institutions of higher learning have an important role to play in sensitizing us, society, to the realities and backgrounds of whoever is seated next to us, to say the person seated next to me is a person. And my perception of who they are, how they came to be, does not have an influence and should not influence or impact who they actually are, because they have their own background, they have their own inclination of thinking as human beings. So various factors, I guess, influence our prejudices. You talk about gender. One could identify as male, female. We'll talk about your sex or sexual orientation. Individuals of the LGBTQI community. We'll look at it from a racial perspective, considering South Africa's history. And I often avoid referring to it as history, because history still prevails today. So race is still an important important role player in our prejudices. Age, for example, nationality, socioeconomic statuses, religion, all these factors are constantly attempting to influence our prejudices, and we should be constantly pushing back as humans to say, I am open to learning. I am open to consistently and constantly unlearning and understanding. So it boils down to us actively seeking, me as an individual, actively seeking to be part and parcel of building an inclusive society.
The students will have different viewpoints, like all of us have different viewpoints. If we are to disagree in the classroom between the student and the lecturer, or between the fellow students, the only thing that I ask or I expect is that whatever disagreements or viewpoints we might have, those have to be based on evidence, so that because I think a lot of prejudice is just we have prejudices, we have the viewpoints and beliefs that are irrational, but they exist, that cannot be substantiated with evidence, but they exist because they are developed for whatever reason. And so if we say that in the classroom we don't accept prejudices, we accept different viewpoints as long as they can be substantiated and supported with evidence, I think that gives us an opportunity to separate between the prejudice and the disagreement that can be there, that should be there, because we have the different viewpoints and we can substantiate those with real credible evidence. And I think if we start approaching our engagement in the classrooms that way, we can then also, in that process, we can also illustrate to ourselves and the students the difference between prejudice and the actual disagreement, the different, the role and the importance of evidence in substantiating our viewpoints.
Various platforms and opportunities are afforded by the universities for students and lecturers as well, I guess, to engage. And in these engagements, we engage with people from different backgrounds. And it is through this or these engagements that we learn to take responsibility for our prejudices, because you can't take responsibility for what we don't know. So these engagements will allow one to pick up that, oh, okay, this might be prejudicial to somebody else or to myself. And it is driven by this factor of my own background. And only then can you take responsibility and say, okay, this is wrong, this is right. But in addition to this, I think especially at an institution of higher learning, it is important to read. Read widely, read extensively. At times, read what you wouldn't ordinarily read. A book, an article, a magazine even. We encourage newspapers, we encourage reading extensively so that we can pick up on prejudices and move from simply holding them to opening and collaborating in a learning and teaching space that welcomes everyone.
Language definitely plays a big role, and with English being the main language, at our institution, it excludes a lot of knowledge. I mean, English is one of 13 languages in South Africa, yet it's the dominant language. The majority of our students, for the majority of our students, English is not their first language, and we expect the students to then adopt English as the only language. It is highly problematic. I don't know what the solution is. I come from Eastern Europe. I grew up in Bosnia. I started learning English properly just before I went to university in the US. I spent first year of my undergraduate studies not being really able to speak English. So I know fully what that is. English is not my first language. And I know how it is to be a student at a university and not being able to express yourself, feeling like I don't have anything to contribute, that I don't know what is going on, that I actually cannot express myself in writing. So yes, language does play this role. Also, English is a dominant language that is part of the whole Eurocentric domination when it comes to knowledge. So this is such a big thing and big topic that, I know that in the debates on decolonization over the last few years, some people have specifically looked at the issue of language and looking at English and the problems with that. I have touched on it as a problem, identifying it as a problem, and kind of referring to the works of other people for more information when it comes to that. But I don't know to what extent and how we can actually change things. But people like Ngugi from Kenya do speak about the importance of other languages and the importance of other languages for the process of decolonization. And that is the key. I mean, how do we approach different languages in South African higher education? English cannot be the only language that people can learn in, especially if, there are two other languages that come before English in their community. So it's a huge project, I think, for universities, especially for language experts. But I'm really hoping that the experts come up with some new ideas, because we can't wait additional 20 years to have just English as dominant language, because it's going to erase other languages. And I think one of the big issues in the whole decolonization debate is how Eurocentric knowledge or Western knowledge has been erasing other knowledges. And, part of that is also through language. So we have to quickly, hopefully, have some ideas when it comes to the language, and how to do it. Unfortunately, in my own engagement in the classrooms, I'm only able to engage in English, and that creates problems. For example, when I did research in South Sudan or in Somaliland, one of the big shortcomings for me was that I could only engage with people in English. I couldn't engage in Somali, I couldn't engage in Arabic, I couldn't engage in various other languages in places like South Sudan that people speak to. And so if I'm doing research in places like that and I can only speak English, and my respondents speak English as a third or fourth language, the responses that I'm getting are also incomplete, because they cannot fully express themselves sometimes in English. So I'm getting just kind of the summaries of things. I don't get the rich information that is out there. In the same way that many people in South Africa cannot express themselves in English as they can in other languages. So language is a huge problem in higher education, in research, in knowledge creation and development. There is no reason why students and academics shouldn't be able to do research and publish their findings and research in different languages. Why is it just English? So yeah, there's a lot of work that has to be done at universities when it comes to that.
For me, it's important to know who my students are. Knowing student demographics. These are students. This is where they come from. Know their experiences. This is what they bring. And from there to then teach in a way that is student-centered, a way that places the student at the center of what I'm doing as a lecturer. So the content should speak to the students. The curriculum itself should speak to the students. It must be relevant, it must be applicable, and it must be engaging for students. It must not just be content for the sake of content, teaching because I have to teach. It must be teaching that which is relevant for a 21st century graduate, for a Nelson Mandela University graduate, for a graduate from a South African university. That must be central in my teaching. It must be applicable for the students to say, from here, how do they use this? Can they use it? Will they use it? And the student must be keen on doing so. So it must really be interesting for the students across the board. So it boils down to a content that to a curriculum and content that tries to cater to everyone by looking at the demographics and the experiences, and also what the market, the job market that is, requires of a Nelson Mandela University graduate.
I cannot understand that for the majority of courses, and I'm talking now before the pandemic, because we've been forced by the pandemic, we've been forced to be more creative when it comes to the assessment, because we cannot have the students sitting there writing 3-hour exams. But I think the one thing that I just cannot understand in higher education is that, it's 2020 and we still cannot figure out how do we assess what students have learned in the classroom, other than making them to try and memorize as much as possible of the material that we have covered over the semester, and then having them sit in a big venue for 3 hours and just from memory show us what they have learned. When the academics who are designing these assessments, these very rigid, 17th, 18th century assessment methods that have not really changed, they themselves are never asked to do things from memory. I mean, we are expected to, have books, use the books, reference the books. We are not doing anything from memory, but we are expecting our students to memorize and then to show us what they know just from memory. When I was doing my undergraduate studies in the US, some of the most difficult but most creative assessments that I had to do were open book exams for various courses. And that has been a massive challenge. You have the book, all the answers are there, but you have to learn how do you look for answers, how do you process the question, how do you figure out what exactly are you being asked to do, and then use all the information at your disposal, the book, the textbook that you're using, or the pile of books that are next to you, to find out and then structure your response. That's what the world of work is. I mean, I saw a joke the other day. Somebody was saying that we ask the students to memorize, but then once they graduate, they're expected to use Google to figure out, whatever response that they have to do out there. So how can we be so disconnected from the realities of the world? At our disposal today, we have, on the phone, we have so much information that is good and relevant, and so much information that is crap. So why don't we engage with students and help them understand how do you process all this information to be able to distinguish between good and bad? And then how do you then process this, massive pile of information to put together a coherent answer to the questions that you are asked? We're not doing that. We have to. I've been engaging with some academics, and we've been talking about assessments, and they were saying that they had to change from full exams to continuous assessment because of the pandemic, but they are expected to go back to old exams and memorizing once the pandemic ends. So it's like, there is an opportunity now that is, we are being forced to innovate. But are you telling me that your plan is to go back to old things that really don't work. I did try to experiment from time to time when I had the freedom to experiment in some spaces. I think we need to try and be flexible a bit. There is I mean, I do understand we have the module outcomes, and we have to, you know, and the learning outcomes, and those are there and they are relevant. But I think, you know, we can look at what we need to go through, what we are hoping our students learn. We can look at all the information that we are trying to give to the students, but we have to, you know, we need to think about how can we be flexible a bit, so that let's say we're talking about different ways of learning and showing that people are learning. You know, why not give students options? You know, do you want to work in groups? Do you want to work on your own? Sometimes we're forcing students to work in group projects when they are not, I mean, they're not functioning well in groups of people. They can just do everything on their own. And they end up sometimes doing the whole project for everybody else because they like working on their own. We have to be flexible a bit and, you know, try to understand who our students are. I mean, this probably would require academics to learn more about the assessments. And this is a whole other topic. You know, we end up teaching students because we have a degree, and not necessarily because we have a degree or knowledge about teaching, you know, how to be effective educator. We don't do that. We require a degree in a field in order to be a lecturer. We don't require, I know that in South Africa, I think only the nursing profession at universities requires from educators to have, I think it's an honors level nursing education degree in order to be able to teach nursing at South African universities and colleges. The other professions don't require, or other fields at universities don't require that. So, you know, do we know how to read the room? You know, of the young people? Do we know different methods of learning and assessment? And, you know, sometimes we might realize halfway through the semester that things are not working. And how do we then switch to something that can actually get us to a point where we can achieve the learning outcomes and all the different things? So I think there's a lot of work that has to happen in academia that requires learning and unlearning and possibly additional requirements put on academics themselves that get us to a point where we are fully capable of delivering what we always claim to be delivering. You know, students are going to be, you know, we tell students they're going to change the world if they come and study here. They're going to be critical thinkers and all these different things. But really, are we ready to deliver on that? I don't think we are. And this is not just about this university. It's about universities globally. You know, we like to say all these things that can kind of sell us to the prospective students. But then, you know, I don't think we always fully ready or we understand how we can deliver on that. But I think to make a long kind of answer shorter a bit, we have to be a bit flexible. We have to have the knowledge of different ways of delivering material, and we have to be able and willing to read the room when we are in the classroom. And that's easier said than done because some people have 300 students in the room, and there is no way you can read that room because it's too big, and you are overwhelmed with, you know, things that you have to do with so many students. But we have to start thinking. We have to start thinking whether there is actually something that works. You know, having an academic in front of 300 students and having that academic teaching two or three courses like that, and then still expecting that academic to produce research and have a life. There's so many things we have to think about, but we have to be flexible, I think, in the classrooms. You know, it's not just that, you know, we put together a course outline and we don't allow discussion about it. Yeah, so I don't know. This again is something that I'm passionate about and I could talk about for days, but I need to stop, I think.